Hi, and welcome to Epic Content Marketing 2016. I'm here with Michael Brenner, and you just had a talk actually complementing what Joe was talking about. But for the audience who wasn't there, can you just quickly summarize what your talk was about?
Yeah, so I talked about content marketing ROI and essentially covered the challenge that we often hear in content marketing from executives, both in marketing and outside in the regular business, who are just trying to understand what's the value of an investment in content marketing versus other kinds of traditional marketing tactics like advertising and other things. So we talked about how content marketing platforms have value that you can monetize and you can demonstrate for financial executives even. And then I walked the audience through 10 different ways using examples and calculations and case studies that you can specifically put a dollar amount or a monetary value against different ways that content marketing provides results.
But for a brand, a lot of people just, or the easiest way to get started is to set up a blog or implement WordPress on your website and get started. But I see some actually go the other way and kind of misses the opportunity to create their own blog, and it just goes to other publishers and publish their content.
Right.
What would you say is the benefit or the loss in doing either thing?
Well, so the benefit of, and both Joe Polizzi and I are strong believers in the content marketing destination that you own as a brand, because you can attract an audience to your branded destination as opposed to reaching out to another publisher. For example, native advertising, it's a good distribution tactic for content you already have, but all of the traffic that comes to a publisher site that you might pay to have access to is theirs. And then they monetize it with digital display and other things. So, I think the question is, why send that your money and the value of your content to a publisher site when you can attract it to your own site?
Yeah. And for marketers that needs to convince their boss to, to get started at least, to look at strategies, to think about implementing a blog and putting resources into this, how would one start? Like, where should you, because it takes convincing, I guess.
Yes.
And if you have some fancy numbers on a cool PowerPoint, the boss is probably going to bend down easier. But do you have any tips for marketers that are eager to get their business in the content marketing game?
Yeah, so there were a couple of financial levers I presented that I looked at in some of my own history with SAP and then with clients as well, where you can identify the opportunity. And the opportunity generally starts with, what are you spending in paid advertising because you don't get that organic traffic on your own site? You can show a dollar value for that. You can look at how much content your company is creating that just doesn't work or doesn't ever get used, which is a much higher number than most people realize. The other thing that you can do is look at web traffic, and so I used unbranded search. And so what I mean is most of the traffic that comes to a company site is somebody types in the company name into Google and then they land on your site. So these are people that are usually quite late in the process. They already know who you are and what you sell, and so they've looked for you specifically. The challenge that content marketing solves is you're reaching people earlier in that buying process. So in the educational steps that they need to go through, content marketing can help bring them to your branded site. So you can quantify the value of each of those and present that opportunity up to the management team.
So you kind of supplement a sales funnel with content that's relevant to the step you are in, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Mapping content to the buyer journey is one of the big questions. I would say probably the second biggest question after content marketing ROI is how do I map content to the buyer journey? And it evolves from the opportunity analysis that you can do that shows for almost every company I've ever looked at. In fact, every company I've ever looked at, they're just not attracting early stage, middle stage buyers to their web properties where they have expertise they can share. They just don't. And so that's, comes back to how do you convince the boss to set up a blog, and as opposed to doing it on publisher sites, it allows you to bring those people in. Yeah.
But should all brands consider working with content marketing?
Yes. The way that I would describe it, and when I talk to CEOs of even the smallest companies and startups, where I try to position content marketing and the opportunity different than a marketing thing, or they'll often say like, oh, you marketeers and this craft of thing that you do. And the way that I like to position it is, every company has a unique value proposition. It's the reason they got started, or there was an idea or a need that they were seeking to solve.
Yeah.
And so every company, based on that need that they originally identified, has an opportunity to share why they think that need is important or why that need went unmet. And they can have that conversation and become an authority on that topic before we get to the what you sell and why it's better and how much it costs.
Yeah.
And so, the question I pose to CEOs and startup founders is, you have an opportunity to be an authority in the market on a specific thing. Why wouldn't you take that opportunity?
Right.
So I can't imagine a company, outside of like a government utility that doesn't need to sell more stuff.
Right. But when is it okay for that brand to come in and say, hey, this is how we can solve your needs?
Yeah, I think I love to say to my clients, I've never seen a company go too far up the funnel. And what I mean by that is, as long as you identify a topic, you can't, the earlier you start with your buyers, the more likely they are to become customers.
Yeah.
And so you can't go too far early in the process,
yeah.
even to the point of creating the need. So Google talks about, in their 0 moment of truth research, trigger events.
Yeah.
So if you're a financial service company and you're talking about, hey, you just got married and you're worried about, how to buy a house and get a mortgage, or how to save for retirement, or, understanding what those trigger events are pre-buying stage.
Yeah.
And to be an educational expert in those is a great idea. So you can't go too far up the funnel.
Yeah. I see that more and more businesses actually contact me and come to me and say, hey, we need 6,000 new newsletter subscribers. Can you do this with Facebook, and how much do you want? And for me, of course, that's a lucrative thing, because I know if you're targeted, I can do whatever you want to do in Facebook. But ultimately, what I try to do is to convince the brands that you need to have a long-term insight. And unfortunately, working in that way that I was talking about, where you pay per newsletter subscription, turns out to be ineffective in the way that the reader kind of forgets that they signed up, and then when they get the email, it's kind of, the bounce rate is super high, and they rarely read it or even just unsubscribes easily. How is it that a subscriber from your website might be more or less willing to stay, rather than, let's say, if you just bought all the newsletters?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the value. I think, the days of trying to trick consumers and buyers into...
It's over.
Yeah, and so I opt into newsletters that provide value to me, and I opt out of those that start over-promoting and they remove the value that I've seen to start. And so that's why content marketing requires a commitment over time. But that commitment needs to be to provide value to the buyer, to the customer, over time.
Yeah.
And if you do that, then they won't bounce. They will come back, and you'll gain more subscribers. So,
but don't you see it as a challenge that, first you have to establish a strategy, you have to develop content, you have to create your own domain, and make your own content hub, and then you have to do the exact same thing on another platform via email. So you have to double the workload.
Yeah. I see email newsletters, like I use an RSS feed-based MailChimp newsletter, so I haven't invested really anything in delivering value through a newsletter. Brands can do the same. Now, many brands have, very complex marketing automation platforms and things like that, so there may be some investment. But I see email newsletters just simply as a distribution mechanism for the existing content marketing.
Yeah. And then to another, a little challenging question. I remember when I got online for the first time, the internet was just a messy place. There were banner ads everywhere when you were the site took a long time to open because of the banner ads. And then everything changed. Like, we got Windows 98, everything looked a little better, but then it's progressed to a point where, and even Facebook works towards a point where ads should be relevant and as timely enough that when I see it, I'm ready to buy it. So I'm kind of more of a fan of that way of thinking and that way of advertising and doing marketing. And to me, honestly, email is like a fossil and a dinosaur that's about to die. Because I have 200 unopened emails on my account now because I know they're spam and I'm not going to open them.
Yeah.
I don't even take the time to delete them. how do you think the email landscape will look in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. Email's a funny thing in that it just doesn't seem to want to go away. And I mean, I have a 12-year-old daughter, and she subscribes to BuzzFeed. And she gets value in the newsletter that she gets from them. So even 12-year-olds are using email. The research shows that even at the youngest ages, search, social, and email are still the top 3 ways that we discover new content.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to continue to be important. The challenge with, I think, looking at one versus the other is that if you do, let's say, targeted advertising on Facebook for a product, it may work, and companies that are effective at showing performance-based marketing activities are investing more in those kinds of things. The problem is that there's just not enough people today ready to buy to serve that targeted ad to. So once you get, let's say you're perfect, you only spend $1 to get $1.50 or whatever. At some point you need to grow beyond those people ready to buy today to the people that want to buy tomorrow, and an audience for the future. And so that's where I think we need content marketing and newsletters and all these kinds of things and organic search to bring those folks back in.
Yeah. Last thing I want to ask you about is the difference or how you kind of weight frequency versus quality. Because both you, Joe, and Jeff have pointed out that you guys started out by blogging 5 times a week for a year or even 19 months.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you say that the quality kind of drops when you're out of stuff to write and you know that you have to be consistent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this question of quality versus quantity comes up all the time, and it's just really interesting that if you look at successful creators, and one of the case studies I talk about is Pixar. Pixar creates all these great movies, and they don't look at it as quality versus quantity. They set a schedule and they create the best animated movie films that they could, and they've created a series of blockbuster hits one after another. If you talk to journalists, and I use this example in the presentation, that a journalist they don't see that as a trade-off. It's just they will produce to the deadlines that they've been given the highest quality piece of content that they can create. So it's not an and or. It's like I said, I think it's a false choice. And I have a friend who went around at a conference and asked a whole bunch of people, what's the opposite of hot? And people would say cold. And what's the opposite of up? And people would say down. And what's the opposite of quality? It's not quantity, right? It's just not quality, right?
Yeah.
It's so they're not opposites, and we can hold both of those things in our mind.
But I mean, like the importance, like should I, let's say, because I blog and Ola blogs, when these guys are promoting their events, they kind of blog about content marketing to get the attraction. But should they, because they have tons of other things to do. They have to sell tickets, they have to get in touch with the partners and organize everything, but at the same time they have to do this content marketing thing. So let's say Ola sets a goal to blog 5 times a week. The closer we come to the actual conference date, he'll see that he doesn't have much time. So I think the solution then would be to either produce some bad content and publish it just for the sake of publishing, or just like admitting that I don't have time for this. Yeah, I mean, like I said, Pixar and publishers would never choose the low quality piece just to hit the deadline. They would reject it. So I think if you have to sacrifice one, it's the quantity. But again, I think it starts with a commitment, and then where you fail to meet that commitment, that's okay. Producing I think a piece of bad content intentionally. I mean, I've made plenty of bad content mistakes unintentionally over the years, but I've never sent something out that I knew was just poor. I've held it back and made it better. Yeah. And if you would give our audience one last tip on how to get started, and like Joe, for instance, gave us a tip about not focusing too much on the technology, just use the free tools that you have and just get it done, and then you can move on. Do you have any tips for brands and individuals that want to start building an audience and like connecting with them?
Yeah, I think it would be, committing to that regular sharing of your company's expertise. I believe it's not hard or expensive. Every company has authority and expertise that sits inside their walls and inside their email inboxes, and it's just a matter of exposing it. And I shared some happy content surprises that can occur when you do that. But the fact is, our companies exist because we have passion and expertise. We just don't think of it as a publisher media mentality to share that with audiences. And once you do on a regular basis, it almost becomes magical that it seems like it happens so easily. But it's really just a matter of changing the way you think.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah. Thank you.